Hi, I'm Joy Macknight, Deputy Editor at The Banker, and I'm here at EuroFinance in Vienna with Gregory Vincent, who's Head of FX EMEA at INTL FCStone. Thank you so much for joining me today, Greg. Can you tell me a little bit about your company and what you do?
Of course. So INTL FCStone is a NASDAQ-listed Fortune 500 company that specialises in niche markets and servicing customers on a global scale in financial markets. The team that I work for, which is known as the Global Payments Division, has been around for 30 years and concentrates on making payments to the developing world, emerging markets that are less well served by the market in general.
Okay, and what are the pain points for corporates doing international and cross-border payments?
So, from our perspective, the biggest complication for corporates when making payments into the markets that we serve, which are generally kind of the bottom 90 currencies, I would guess, the ones often referred to as exotics, is a question of certainty. So corporates struggle to get clarity on the cost of their transfer, the amount that will be delivered, when it will be delivered. And what we try and do is bring some transparency and certainty to that process to give corporates kind of comfort and understanding of the cost of making the transfer, the amount it will arrive, and when it will arrive.
But what are the biggest risks for corporates making the cross-border payments, let's say in emerging markets or developing markets?
Well, I think it goes back in many ways to the same issue of your first question. It's one of certainty. The biggest risk I think a corporate has is that they're unsure the amount that will turn up. Will this settle their bill? Will this settle their obligation? Have they overpaid for the amount that they were needing to settle in that currency? And further, where are the funds in the process? If you send your payment through the traditional correspondent banking network, there have historically been challenges with finding out where your funds are in the settlement process. What INTL FCStone bring to the party, so to speak, is that by having a network of around about 300 correspondent banks who are generally local banks in the markets that we're making payments into, we can actually bring some clarity to where your payments are, what the blockage is, and get kind of resolution on your payment in the quickest possible time. So I think the biggest risk that the corporates face is non-settlement of a payment into one of these slightly more exotic markets. And by being on the ground, hopefully, we're pretty sure that we bring a resolution to that problem.
Do you see the correspondent banking industry changing or transforming itself?
Very much so. So I think all corporates are seeing this, and the market in general is seeing this big de-risking by the global banks. Now, the global banks are kind of forced into this corner by the regulators, and these global banks are now looking at their correspondent network and thinking, is there value in running a correspondent account in this currency any longer? Do I put enough business across this network? And it's very interesting. So to go back to one of your earlier questions about our business, we have a customer network, a customer base of around 650 to 700 customers, but that includes 10 to 15 of the world's largest banks. Now, I had a conversation recently with one of the very largest US banks, and he was actually saying to me that we have economies of scale that they will never really have in some of these more esoteric markets, because the amount of payments this bank makes to that particular market don't really justify the cost and the exposure they have to the local bank. Whereas because we're making payments on behalf of them and all of their peers, it justifies us having the expense it takes to monitor these local markets. And we have a team of kind of 6 to 8 people who just constantly travel. They're down in these markets, they're visiting our local banks, they're understanding the risks associated with these banks, they're in front of the local regulators, they're in front of the local central banks, and really kind of bringing some clarity to the risks involved in making payments in these markets. So yes, we are fundamentally seeing a change, and we're seeing the global banks shrinking their own correspondent network. And interestingly enough, so we've been working with some of the very largest banks in the world for around about 10 years. When we first started working for these banks, they were very much made us sign confidentiality clauses, look, we don't want the market to know that we're using an outsourced third-party provider. There's certainly, they wanted to portray this idea that they as a global bank could make these payments. And I think that the shift now we're seeing is kind of 10 years later, instead of them being kind of reluctant to admit that they had to use a specialist, they're actually switching that on its head and now saying to their customers, actually, we've gone out and we found the best-in-class provider for these markets, and actually this is a position of strength for the bank rather than a position of weakness. And I think that's really, in many ways, the biggest change that we're seeing in that space.
Okay. And there's tons of buzz around blockchain. Do you think blockchain is going to disrupt the cross-border payments market?
So, I don't claim to be a tech person, right? I've had blockchain, I've had Ripple explain to me, what solution they think they bring to the market. I think it's all a question of value, right? What value will it bring that the current process or another process couldn't bring? And I think blockchain's biggest challenge is going to be one of scale. So if you take Swift has, and I've heard various numbers, I don't know the precise details, but north of 10,000 banks sit on the Swift network, right? If you're Ripple and you want to offer an alternative service, and you've now got 30 banks on your network, that's quite a big gap. So you've got to be bringing something that Swift doesn't have or can't do to be able to kind of fundamentally change. So we are, seeing a lot of development in the Global Payments Initiative, which we think is very interesting. We think that Swift has reacted extremely well to the Ripple challenge and is actually innovating of itself. And, I and a lot of my colleagues believe that if the Global Payments Initiative provides the kind of functionality that the blockchain says it will provide, there'll come a moment where it becomes very difficult for the blockchain to replace the existing network. So I think blockchain is bringing innovation to the market. Is it going to replace the market? I'm not so sure. Swift is very deeply embedded. All of our banks, we deal in places as exotic as Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, even Sierra Leone, South Sudan. In all of these countries, all the banks are on Swift. That's a long way to go for all those banks to be on, and whether their systems can even support blockchain. So maybe in 20 years' time, there'll be this paradigm shift, and you'll see people want to move towards something that's fundamentally different. Ultimately, I think the Global Payments Initiative will offer the existing customers the solutions that they're really looking for from blockchain in the short term.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much, Greg.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.